Excellencies, honored speakers and distinguished guests present with us today, as well as those joining us online. My name is Susanne Simolin, and I am the director of the Åland Island Peace Institute. I have the honor to welcome you to these Kastelholm Talks on Peace, organized by the Åland Island Peace Institute for the 11th time. The Kastelholm Talks are always arranged at the end of March in connection with the Åland Demilitarization Day, which is the 30th March. They always address a theme which we believe is important to peace. In a sense, they are inherently peaceful in the way that we encourage dialogue and listening rather than debate. They are meant to provide a space for reflection and perhaps some necessary distance to events occurring in the present now, buzzing around us in the media flows and social streams. The goal is to examine long-term trends, not only focusing on immediate crisis. And this year, as has happened also previously in the history of the Kastelholm Talks, the theme we selected has proven to be even more relevant by the time the talks are held than when we first chose them. So diplomacy in our time, spaces, places, and faces. I believe it sparks reflection, at least it has done so for me during the past few months. I am eagerly looking forward to the discussion, guided by our moderator, Deputy Director at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and also chair of the Peace Institute's research board, Katja Kreutz. And we are very happy and honored that we have President Halonen, who is the patron of the talks and who has chosen to join us in person also this year. With these words, I will leave the floor to Katja Kreutz, who will introduce us to our eminent panel. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Susanne, so much for the introduction and the introductory words as well. And welcome on my behalf also to the 2025 edition of the Kastelholm Talks, Diplomacy in Our Time, Spaces, Places and Faces. And I have to start by admitting that I have big shoes to fill after Sias Piliopoulo-Åkermark, who has been moderating these talks for several years. So I will do my best in the new capacity. And today, the topic of today has very many angles, and I hope that when we go home from here today, everybody in the audience has at least some new thoughts to take home with them, and then we can continue the discussion at the library as well. The places refer to the places where diplomacy is practiced. We can talk about organizations, multilateral organizations, bilateral relations, but spaces, of course, adds an extra new dimension to it. So we're talking also about the virtual space and new technologies. And faces can, of course, refer to whatever you think about when you think about diplomacy. Maybe it refers to the masculine turn we have witnessed in diplomacy and foreign policy overall, but it can also refer to diplomacy's purposes that can be good or bad, a gender's face, so to say. But before I give the floor to President Halonen, I will shortly introduce today's eminent speakers indeed. Such high-level expertise here today, so I feel really honestly humbled to be in your company. But first we have here Minna Kukkonen-Karlander, who is a senior manager at Crisis Management Initiative, CMI, and she is in the Asia program since August 2021, focusing on Northeast and Southeast Asia. Prior to that, she worked as a manager and advisor in several of CMI's mediation and conflict resolution activities in Sub-Saharan Africa and in Indonesia. She has over 10 years of experience in peace mediation and conflict resolution, policy advice, and practical implementation. Anders Lidén is a former ambassador and counselor for foreign affairs at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Mr. Lidén has been head of Sweden's UN delegation, and he has also been ambassador in Helsinki, among other places. He has studied history and political science, and over the years he has accumulated extensive knowledge of Middle Eastern issues and experience from peace negotiations and the UN Security Council. Annika Söder is a Swedish diplomat and politician and senior advisor to the European Institute of Peace on issues related to the Middle East region. She was cabinet secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Sweden from 2014 to 2019 and state secretary for development cooperation and humanitarian affairs in the MFA from 2002 to 2006. She has also served as the OSCE Special Representative in the South Caucasus and in the Geneva International Discussions on the Georgia conflict. I also want to mention that she was a member of the Swedish Women Mediators Network. And there is so many things she has done, but now I think it's time to turn to the discussion. But we are ready for the first remarks. President Halonen, the floor is yours.
Ja, det är lite skojigt att tala engelska här, men jag försöker i varje fall, kanske det går bättre än på svenska. So, dear participants, dear friends, bästa deltagare, kära vänner. So, the topic of this year's Kastelholm Talks on Peace is timely. Diplomacy and dialogue provide the surest way to the sustainable peace, but do other people believe it today? So we are living in a period of profound transformation, increasing number of wars and conflicts driving human suffering around the world, including in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and so that was my original list, but I have already put Yemen there. I hope that during our discussions we don't get any more names. Geopolitical divisions are deepening. There often seems to be more issues than divides than unite us. Diplomacy is a part of the classical international politics, yes, you know. But I'm a former lawyer originally, and so I go back to the Montesquieu. What is the democratic state? Human rights, good governance, rule of law, or in Europe we say Rechtsstat. Western countries have concentrated mainly during the last years in the human rights, freedom of speech, etc., and also very much in elections. And elections are important, but also the time between the elections. So the times are now very different. Human rights are generally taken quite much under assault. The backlash on women's rights is also growing stronger at the same time when the global crises are affecting women and girls hardest. So democracy and rule of law are under the threat in many countries around the world. And at the same time that we don't forget the quiet difficulties. Our planet is fast approaching tipping points of no return on several fronts. And this list could go and go on. So one thing is clear. No country can meet at least the present environmental challenges alone, but I think that peace is also the part of the same type. Solving the interconnected crisis requires stronger and more effective multilateral cooperation. We need dialogue, trust, and deeper understanding of each other. So, in my own mind, when we are speaking diplomacy, I have never been diplomat, but I hope I have used the diplomacy. It can be seen as a structure, context, and way to behave. All parts are also in the Montesquieu triangle. Structure is not only countries, but also, as it already mentioned in an opening words, it's more permanent, something what we could call international organizations or rule-based society. So the United Nations has to be reformed to reflect the world we live in today, but the 80 years old organization is an excellent example of the progress we can achieve by working together. When United Nations was founding, the underlying idea was never again after the Second World War. Today, UN remains the main forum for international cooperation, playing a key role in the promotion of international peace and security, human rights, sustainable development, disarmament, the fight against climate change, and many, many others. But the basis is really, it is the rule-based system. And I can say, as I'm still a member of the advisory board in mediation of the Secretary General of the United Nations, that it has been quite quiet house. So all systems can, of course, be reformed. I would like to finish with a positive note. The transformation that we are living has also, at least in theory, potential for a more prosperous and safer world. But then we have to work very hard indeed, because there are also a lot of risks. I confess openly, because you know about my background, violence might have to be stopped with force, but peace requires willpower and diplomacy and international cooperation. In coming days, we will see how the new type of the discussions will work. I think that many of us, we have in our memory the shadows of the past, which are not very optimistic. We in the Nordics, we are, anyway, let's be a little bit egocentric. We in the Nordics, we are an excellent example of dialogue and cooperation as the way forward. And we have had also not so peaceful past centuries ago, but we have learned. And here in the Åland Islands, diplomacy and international law have played a key role in creating a sustainable and lasting solution. So we all want to bless the League of Nations. I very much look forward to the discussions today, also in order to learn something, because I think that during the 50 years I have been in the politics, the diplomacy has had a role. I'm very interested to know whether it will have in the future. Thank you. Om någon vill att ge penna till mig, jag vill vara mycket optimistisk. Jag har den väskan, och tack för att jag skriver något ner. Tack.
Thank you, President Halonen. And we go now to hearing the remarks of Minna. Please, Minna, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I have several pens. Yeah, thank you. Madam President. Madam President, dear distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I really want to thank the Åland Islands Peace Institute for the opportunity to join you today in the Kastelholm Talks. We've enjoyed very good collaboration with the Institute and hope to continue that in the years to come. So coming from CMI, which is a Finnish peace mediation organization, I approach today's theme, diplomacy in our time, through the lens of not a diplomat, not either a diplomat, but a practitioner in the informal side of peacemaking and conflict resolution. And while recognizing that diplomacy as a concept is wide and that diplomacy as a practice of foreign policy includes many tools, only one of which is mediation, that is a specific tool to settle disputes between parties. My focus is thus a bit narrower maybe than fellow panelists, but tries to address some of the challenges and opportunities of peacemaking in the current global context. A few words about the context of which we have discussed also in this past day and so with colleagues. But we are in the midst of a shifting international order that is shaped by geopolitical fragmentation and polarization, and an increasing emphasis on deterrence and militarization. But simultaneously, the adherence to previously quite widely accepted international norms and rules is weakening, leaving fewer opportunities for diplomacy as well. We can see the return of interstate conflicts, increasing instability, and more armed conflicts than at any point since the Second World War. But contrary maybe to the past decades that have seen the professionalization and institutionalization of peacemaking, in recent years the mediation efforts have become increasingly influenced by geopolitics, with peacemaking actors needing to be more attuned to the interest of different regional and global powers. In the past years, peacemaking has become an increasingly crowded field, with the proliferation of state and non-state actors, including newer, if you will, emerging states such as Qatar, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates, but also major players such as China that are becoming or broadening their focus from their immediate neighborhood to the global peace mediation scene. But also then military and intelligence actors have also been taking a more prominent roles from traditional diplomats and diplomacy in this field. So peace agreements that used to be anchored in multilateral frameworks are now more likely to occur on a case-by-case basis. And the actors engaging in peacemaking have also maybe more diverse motivations, ranking from narrow economic and military interests to the then general commitment to supporting rules-based international order still. And as, so to say, non-Western actors are playing a more prominent role in shaping peace processes, it is also important for us as Western peacemaker countries to recognize this ongoing change and greater diversity of worldviews when it comes to peace and security. And this development can also pose, of course, opportunities in the form of new thinking, knowledge and support, but it also, of course, poses many questions. And the question maybe for the Western actors is now how to navigate this change when at the same time also a growing number of contexts have remained or are becoming politically quite sensitive to engage with. This is maybe due to sanctions regimes or constitutional changes of government, where it's difficult for the Western actors sometimes to engage. And at the same time, the non-Western actors or other actors than the traditional ones maybe assume more pragmatic stance and pursue relations and also their own efforts towards peace or other economic interest with these actors. So in this situation, how should we as Western actors be thinking? Can we thinking of widening the list of people or actors we can speak to, and what in the long run will be the result of leaving certain groups outside of our discussions? In the future, traditional peace processes, as we have known them in the past decades, will become much less common, in the sense that there is a noticeable shift from comprehensive processes to increased fragmentation. And processes that used to be formalized and multilateral and mandated are likely to be less structured, with fewer multilateral frameworks and more unpredictable as well. So the eroding trust in multilateral frameworks and engagement with a widening range of mediation actors are likely also to affect the inclusiveness of peace efforts. For example, as my colleagues in CMI, we have a special unit focusing on women in peacemaking. And they very much highlight that the Women, Peace and Security agenda that this year celebrates its 25th anniversary is founded on such normative frameworks that are now being increasingly challenged. And it will need to be reassessed how the core principles of this Women, Peace and Security agenda can be adapted to the changing power dynamics, as many non-Western actors in mediation at least approach this agenda differently, and they are playing a stronger role in the shaping of peace processes. So there is a need to ensure that the agenda, the WPS, if you will, agenda remains an effective tool and not just a normative framework, but also practical and context-sensitive approach to mediation and peace building. So in addition to the changes, we're seeing the technology that is transforming both warfare, but also the practice of peacemaking. And in CMI, we think that when implemented with sensitivity, digital tools can enhance the transparency and legitimacy of peace efforts by broadening ownership and enabling inclusion across multiple tracks. Mediation actors can gain deeper insights into conflict dynamics through digital real-time monitoring and analysis of conflict drivers. And digital communication platforms can also create new channels for community engagement, and that can really remove some of those barriers in terms of geographical and social levels. And then the technologies that are now opening new opportunities to reach marginalized population that have been previously excluded from peace processes. And naturally, the development of AI, so the artificial intelligence capabilities, also pose possibilities. Maybe just because peace processes also inherently involve the processing of quite a lot of or vast amounts of complex and qualitative data from different sources. So this is something where AI could be well used. But when combined with human expertise and cultural sensitivity, these technological capabilities can offer new possibilities to more inclusive efforts. So not only challenges. But there, I try to not to speak so long, but there are, of course, the many challenges, but also evolving opportunities, and this field is shifting very quickly. And we as CMI, as an organization focused on dialogue and peacemaking, also think constantly how to orient ourselves in this changing landscape. And in this, we do remain somehow guided by the principles of our founder, President Ahtisaari, that the principles that have served us for the past 25 years. And some of those principles still, which I want to highlight here, maybe as something we continue to believe in, is that we do think that it is still the parties that own the conflicts, and the only people who can make the peace are the parties to the conflict, and they should also be given recognition for the peace. That's one of the principles our work is founded on. But also President Ahtisaari's idea of treating everybody equally, and the need to bring all relevant actors to the table is really essential for the peace to sustain. And peace is not something that can be done only among the few. And the elite bargains and the quick fixes have a tendency of not lasting so long. But peace building peacemaking is a teamwork. You can't do it alone. And we must involve everyone who can have an impact on the peace process in order to make sure the process is as comprehensive and as sustainable as possible, even in the current realities, which are not making this very easy. But this is something, a tenet we believe in. But I hope some of these thoughts can serve as a starting point for our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. I'm sure we can get back to some of the points you raised and discuss them together. But now it's Anders' turn to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, good. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about this very timely subject, like you said, President Halonen. We live in a time with many changes. It's a turbulent time because there are many things going on. There is a long-term trend of changing the balance of global power. These are always very dangerous and difficult times when that happens. You know, the old Greek historian Thucydides, he said that that's when we risk having wars, is when balances of power change. And we had for some time, we have had a clear Western decline in power. And that, of course, the West will be or has already been further weakened by the conflicts between Europe and America. And other worrying trends are also the disregard for international norms and international law. And we see that happening. I would say this is a challenge in particular for the smaller countries. Third, I would like to mention also the change in the diplomatic language and diplomatic style. We see a lot of new kind of diplomacy now, which we're not used to before. And we see even the United States now joining what we thought were more Russian or Chinese diplomacy, targeting even allies and friends. So this is, of course, a challenging situation, especially for the smaller countries. We run the risk of having more of an international anarchy where the might is right. And we may see also big powers over the heads of the smaller ones deciding about spheres of influence. And I think that would put us, the smaller countries, in a very difficult position and situation, and we have to think about how we're going to use diplomacy in order to face these challenges. I would say also that certainly diplomacy is always discussed, is it relevant anymore and so on, but it's clear that this has a long, long history, and diplomacy will continue to be extremely important. We have the big challenges, of course, of climate change, migration, conflicts, pandemics. We all need to deal with them and solve them with diplomacy. There's no doubt about that. So diplomacy will be needed to face those issues, and we will have to work with bilateral diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy. The bilateral will always be important because you have to nurture relations with your neighbors and other countries. But the multilateral has become more important and more relevant, and I think in particular for the smaller states, because we need to work with others in order to have a say and to be able to influence these developments. And I would say we would not, sometimes in the discussion, particularly in Sweden, there has been either you are for a global approach or you think about your near region. But I think it has to be both, because in this global struggle of power, we need also to build bridges to the south. And these countries have, I think, a tendency of moving away from the West. Of course, colonialism played its role, and it has a history where they don't really like us. And it's very tempting for them to side with China or other countries that could provide material benefits, and maybe even have a certain appeal when it comes to political authoritarianism and so on. And I think this is something we have to deal with. I would go back to the kind of traditional diplomacy that I'm used to. Traditional diplomacy is about, trying to, of course, persuade others, but also to solve problems and bridge differences. And that you should do in a respectful and business-like manner. It's extremely important to be able to face another party, to sit with them, to understand how they think in order to maybe find common ground. And if you don't find common ground, at least you will find out who is this other partner, how shall we deal with it? If it's a very aggressive one, we should learn how to handle it. So whatever we do, we need this kind of diplomacy, the traditional diplomacy. But as we all know, we have seen it, of course, not least in the last month or so, that this more aggressive diplomacy is gaining ground. And I think we had that. It's nothing new. It's always happened. We had it in the 30s, you know. What the Italians and the Germans did was this kind of diplomacy. And it's very worrying to see it happening. And I'm afraid that, you know, the kind of diplomacy which uses lies, insults, and humiliates the other party. What I've learned, that's the worst kind of diplomacy you can even think of. And if that's gaining ground, how shall we deal with it? And I think we, the smaller countries, we will always have to work with others. And that, I think, is what we will do and what we are going to do and what we are doing. We need to use our contacts, of course, within the European Union. But as I said, we should also reach out beyond the European Union. We have a tremendously good cooperation among the Nordic countries. That's very, very essential. And I think because if we are going to negotiate or conduct diplomacy with those partners that are aggressive and so on, we need to be strong. And we need to hold on to traditional diplomacy as much as possible. But we also need strength. We cannot just show weakness, because then we will be run over. And that's why we need to work with the others, because we are too small and too weak by ourselves. So this is what I see the challenge for us, to find ways of using the good old diplomacy, but also find that strength. And I think, you know, things may change again very easily. You know, Trump will disappear, there will be a new government and so on in America. But we're not sure. This could be a more long-term trend, and we have to be prepared for it, I think. When it comes to making diplomacy effective and work, there has to be trust. And I think, you know, a minimum of trust is needed to make progress. To lie, to humiliate, and threaten is the opposite of building trust. So we're coming way away from each other. We are separating each other from each other by using such methods. And it might be that the big powers think that they have an advantage because they can use these kind of methods that we cannot afford to do as small countries, because they are relevant anyway, and they are important because of their power. We are not. We have to use traditional diplomacy to gain anything at all. And that's our weapon. Some say this is our first line of defense, but it's a very important one. And I think we should hold on to that. And something we also have to think of is, you know, for diplomacy to work in the long perspective, it has to have a long perspective approach, and it has to build on what could be considered legitimate. And if it doesn't, it doesn't hold. And I think this kind of diplomacy, this work that's based on pressure and so on, doesn't create sustainable solutions. So we'll do that too. I don't know, I don't have too much more time. Oh, I have much more to say, but I thank you very much for listening.
I had this one. Thank you, Anders. And Annika?
Thank you, Madam President, friends at the Åland Peace Institute, and friends assembled here in the room and online. It's a pleasure to be here together with distinguished colleagues to have a chance to speak about the difficult situation we find ourselves in. I find the name of this exercise to be brilliant: spaces, places, and faces, and I would like to start there. We have shrinking spaces for what Minna and Anders have been talking about, for negotiations, for respect, for diplomacy, and for compromise. And I think this is both a domestic issue and an international issue. So the question is, can we come back to the right spaces when most of our mind these days go to the militarization of our world and to the ugly faces that we confront every day. And I believe that faces has a double meaning. We are looking at human faces who would not really be willing to handle the world in a way that we have been used to for a long time. Where are the alternative role models when it comes to the faces beyond Trump, Putin, Erdogan, and many, many other authoritarian leaders? And where are the faces in the meaning of surface? Can we dig deeper to find the breeding ground for respect and understanding and the joint way forward? And when it comes to places, I believe we have a very important conversation to discuss if we can rejoin on the multilateral scene, in the OSCE, in the UN, and in the many bodies, the institutions that are so important. When it comes to the role of diplomacy, I truly believe it is the first line of defense. I also believe that all our friends in the military believe it's the first line of defense, because what we want to do is to find peaceful solutions to conflicts, but maybe also use deterrence to be able to hold dialogue. And I believe this combination is very important. This was also said in one of the propositions to the Swedish bills to the Swedish Parliament when we started to increase our defense expenditure, that diplomacy should be the first line of defense. This is about politics, economy, and the diplomatic means to deter war. The question, I believe, for many of us is those of us who worked through diplomacy, dialogue, negotiations, for rule of law, for international law, in particular, I would say, with our Russian neighbor, were we wrong when we now see what is going on in Ukraine? Do we have to do some soul searching when it comes to how we used the peaceful instruments? Is there a way to move into an up-to-date model for regaining a peace order, bearing in mind that the situation now is showing other directions? So I believe there are several dilemmas and ways forward we should be discussing. It's also, what are we defending? We need to, in parallel to arming ourselves, we need to know what we have to defend, to have a close look at democracy, freedoms, welfare, and this is true in every country. It's also true for the EU, which is also a very important harbor for all of the Nordic, or most of the Nordic countries, and in particular for Sweden and Finland. Also that we make the case that as we defend ourselves, we also try to engage in dialogue and in a conversation. My Saudi Arabian friends who relate to Iran, they say that we really want to have a coexistence, so we work with deterrence and dialogue. I can come back to that situation, but I believe it's a good note for us to try to follow these days, as we cannot count on Trump and we cannot trust Putin. We need to look at the counter forces. We need, in short, to build broad alliances, the Nordic countries, of course, but also there are middle powers around the world who would like to engage in exactly the way Anders described. We must not forget climate, biodiversity, digitalization, pandemics. We mustn't forget also our relationship with China, which is a very complex one. I also think that the Nordic countries have a very special role to play. If we look at the global concerns, more or less the same as our concerns, we can see that there is more trust in the Nordic countries than in many of the EU countries. As we are now all members of NATO, I believe we have a very important job to do to strengthen what we can do together. Mediation has been on the agenda for a very long time between, in particular, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. We never got there. I hope that we can put some competition aside and strengthen the role we can play through diplomacy in the world, which is also, of course, in our own interest. I also believe that as we have a conversation about the role that nuclear arms play, we have first to realize that we cannot see one-sided disarmament of nuclear arms, but we can certainly continue to work against the possible enhancement of nuclear arms, and maybe today even more importantly, to avoid continued proliferation of nuclear arms. Because if nuclear arms starts to play a more important role in the European security doctrine, for sure we will see followers that are not legitimate. We have some today, Israel, Pakistan, India, but then we may see North Korea, Iran, possibly the other countries neighboring Iran. So it's a duty related to what we do with our own continent to also scrutinize the threat of using nuclear arms by President Putin, but then also try to find a way to get out of this possible spiral. Finally, in addition to the Nordic cooperation in all foreign policy fields, I also wanted to mention something that happened a very long time ago. That was the North-South dialogue. When decolonization was very new, there was a dialogue between engaged northern countries and southern countries to actually overcome the resentments and the suffering that many of them had. And I think that there is certainly time for this now. So as we support Ukraine, as we try to counter the threats coming in various ways from the US and from Russia and others, we also need to reach out and to build security together, because it will actually profit ourselves. I realize that all of this is very expensive, but I think it has to, we have to allow it to be expensive, because otherwise we will be losers, all of us. Finally, we have to work hard, as Madam President said, And in order to inject some hope, I wanted to quote Dag Hammarskjöld, since I was also the director of the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation in Uppsala. He said, "Never look at the height of a mountain before you have reached the top, and then you will see how low it was." Thank you.
So thank you. Excellent starting points for the discussion, and I think time is very short today, but I'm glad the discussion can continue then in the library in Swedish later on, because I'm sure we can't cover everything here. But I'll just like to ask a few sort of extra questions on some of the points that you raised already, of course. And Anders, I would like to hear, you spoke about aggressive diplomacy, and I guess we all saw this awful setting in the White House with Trump, Zelensky, and Vance, and reacted to it, that it was something that we're not used to, at least not here in the Nordics. But can aggressive diplomacy have good outcomes?
Well, I think this is something that the big powers have used also in the past. And they, as I said before, they can afford it. And I have one example which didn't turn out well, but could have. It was after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. James Baker, the American foreign minister, went to Geneva to talk to the Iraqi foreign minister. And that was tough talk. And in the best of cases, it would have led to a withdrawal of the Iraqis from Kuwait. But they had a president there, Saddam Hussein, who was not thinking along those lines. But what I mean by this example is that it could be useful, obviously, to talk tough. But when you do this in the manner that Trump does to friends and allies and the way he treats Canada, it's in my view, counterproductive. Because it undermines all trust that is possible, and trust is necessary. But in a clear case like the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, it could have worked.
And we have seen so far, of course, we are waiting for results anyhow. So in his previous term, of course, he tried to also with North Korea, but so maybe there will be some evidence to the contrary. But so
the problem is that he uses soft talk to the dictators.
Soft talk to the hard men.
It's the friends that he insults and humiliates.
Yeah. So Minna, you talked about peace mediation, and you're a practitioner, but it would be interesting, I guess, to us that are sort of not in the same field to hear, how do you see the differences between diplomacy and peace mediation, and can one separate one from the other?
Yeah, thanks. I think we can see peace mediation as a tool for diplomacy in the public diplomacy, but also in the informal sphere where I work. And I think it is, well, as I was alluding to in my short presentation, of course, peace mediation as a field is undergoing a lot of changes, but nevertheless, I think as a tool of diplomacy, peace mediation is very well worth investing, and a cost-efficient way of also responding to conflicts. Maybe in terms of diplomacy and peace mediation, I think also maybe relating a little bit to what you discussed, what Anders just said about aggressive diplomacy, and I think there are also ways in which tough discussions, also in the field of mediation, can be done, so to say, discreetly and out of the public eye, and that is maybe something that in the field of where I work in informal diplomacy, that this discreetness and confidence building and this trust building can happen out of the limelight of the public sphere, is sometimes probably more conducive to finding, solutions to different conflicts, but of course that can be both done by states or private actors.
And please feel free to comment also on others' perspectives if you have thoughts on that. But Annika, we've talked, many of you raised the issue of new actors, the Gulf countries and China in diplomacy and peace mediation. So you touched a bit on it, but I would like to hear some more. What new do they bring to the table? And can we live with the agendas that they promote? And I guess a fair conclusion is that diplomacy doesn't look the same all around the world. Or how would you react to such a statement?
First, diplomacy is a very wide concept, and of course many diplomatic tools are also used in peace mediation. The new mediators, if we talk about Qatar and the Arab Emirates, lately we've seen some movements from Saudi Arabia and Oman as well, is that most of them have an agenda. So if we compare their role with the role the Nordics have played over decades, if we look back, it's different in the sense that our interest has been love, peace, and harmony. Their interest may be more focused also on their own reputation or their own gains. However, they also do something that we seem to be less willing to do today, and that they invest in dialogue, in peaceful means, in bringing actors together, while I think we are already in a shift when it comes to economic investment in dialogue, affecting foreign ministries, affecting the mediation organizations where we, as many of us, are involved. And if just a small percentage of what we now invest in military means would be used for dialogue, for more diplomacy, more embassies, in order also to prevent further negative development and use the reputation we, the Nordics, have, it would be different. With this, I also want to add that I think it's extremely important that we collaborate with the Arab Gulf countries that want to step forward, and they are very, very interested in collaborating with us and to understand how our countries and governments work, but also how mediation organizations work.
May I add something about China? The Chinese diplomacy has changed a lot over the years, and with the new president, Xi Jinping, we have seen that the Chinese also use the more aggressive big power diplomacy. And we saw that in Sweden, where they had an ambassador there who attacked and threatened the Swedish ministers, and it was totally counterproductive. I think that China lost so much sympathy in Sweden by that kind of diplomacy.
And I was at the other end.
You were at the other end, so you were the target. But I remember when serving on the UN Security Council in 1997 to 98, my best partner to negotiate with was the Chinese, because there was a completely different approach. They were very clear about what they wanted. They were not weak, I can say that, or soft, but they did everything to try to find a solution in a respectful and businesslike manner, which I don't think is the case always today.
I would like to disagree somewhat. I think we have two faces of China. One also wanting to be a mediator, an honest broker, to learn from us. And many experts also say that they do not have the same imperialist ambitions as some of the other bigger powers we've talked about. And an example of something positive is how the re-established relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia was mediated first by small Oman and then by China. And China now has an agreement with with Iran and Saudi Arabia, for them to come and report how their relationship is evolving every 6 months. And I believe for the Gulf countries and for also taming Iran, this is important because they don't want to be dependent on only the United States or only Europe or only China. So they are also putting their eggs in different baskets.
But I think this is also part of Chinese expansionism. And about the tough diplomacy, you can probably ask the Southeast Asians who have a lot to do with China, and they fear China, what China is doing and turning into. So, of course, there are many sides to relationship to China, and I hope we can have the best, because my experience, personal experience, is very good relations with Chinese diplomats.
Well, if we speak about the new powers in this field, it's obvious if we look at the Arab Gulf countries that there are not many women sitting around the tables, right? So Minna mentioned also, and I think President Halonen would agree, that women bring something to the table and are important there. But what exactly are we missing out on when there are no women around the table?
So I would say that, of course, I'm already 81 years old, and I have been about 50 years in the politics. So I have been in Qatar, I have been in Saudi Arabia, and all this, Afghanistan, and so there are the different kind of the ways how they approach. For instance, I remember when we had a state visit to Saudi Arabia, and we have issues to discuss. So they say that, you see that, Madam, we have made an exception concerning your gender in the same way what we made on Queen Elizabeth. So they released us being a woman. So I mean that when you say, that it can be sometimes the countries we don't know so well, they can be very pragmatic and cooperative, in the way that they try to find the places where we can find a solution. And I think that that's one part we should remember. And then coming to the women is that we have also been in the meetings where, now lately, when we have the UNCCD, which is this big desertification organization of the UN. We had on last December the biggest meeting they have had, and that was in Riyadh. And then we were preparing it in New York. So I was the only woman in the round table which was preparing. But Hanna, you are somewhere. Hey, yeah, they're back. Why are you there hiding behind? So Hanna is already an experience. Yeah, there are the 3 seats also in front. But Hanna was with me there, and so she was sitting with the table of the women. And so I mean that this double information we could get discussing with men and discussing with women was useful. Concerning just that how the society works. And so now when we visited Saudi Arabia, I would say so that, there have been changes in the society. We saw a lot of women who have been taken to this international conference to work there, and we heard also that they have the similar situation at the university, that women are very active with the studies and so on. But then how it goes further through the society, of course, with the short visit you cannot see that. And so also I remember already years ago in Qatar, when I had a possibility to work those naughty boys, so-called. So they had also, in many departments, they had a woman, somewhere with a veil in their face, somewhere without, and they, in a way, saw always that that's a family business very strongly. But anyway, I mean that the fact is that the power has been now going to the southeast, not only in Asia, but also concerning the Middle East and Europe. And I don't know, I have been very, hesitating, what should we think now that we have been very critical, perhaps sometimes too critical concerning that with whom we are discussing. We say that this or that country or the politician is not good enough to work with us. And I remember also with concerning the Latin America, how many times years ago we said to Central American people, when we Nordics, we try to work with them and say that the model we have with Nordics could be also good for them. They didn't do that. So at the same time, USA made bilateral agreements, one after another, and EU was only waiting that whether they could be to come to the discussions collectively. They never came. And so this is now a little bit the same with some Latin American countries. Some are too progressive, some are too conservative for us. And then we can see that BRICS countries is growing, and the others are doing the work what we have said that it's not good for us. So we want that they have a certain standard. So I'm not saying that that's wrong what we have said. I will say only that it can be so that those who are more liberal, putting in the notes, liberal in that sense, are a bigger group than what we expected. And I understand very well that most of the Western countries have been shocked when they see that USA is now interested to make bargain with those which we thought that it's not good. And so when you said concerning the women, anti-gender movement is strong and strong all the time, and they have no difficulties to get money. But this is only one symptom. There are also others different, dissimilar, so that all this human rights agenda, rule of law, and also the other democratic systems. I think that we have to think that what is the most, what is the best or the strongest way to support these good old ideas I support strongly, but seem to be that they are not very much now fashionable.
Thank you. Minna, maybe you want to say something on women and their role for CMI, but then I think we should actually pick up on this point that how do we reconcile our value base and dialogue with these that don't share it. But maybe the others can think about that. And Minna, if you want to say on the role of women.
Yes, the role of women, of course, is an important strategic priority for CMI, and we've had, as I think I said, a specialized team on women in peacemaking for the past 10 years and trying to really increase the inclusivity of women in peace processes, which is still very much lacking. And I think in this current environment, as has been discussed, also somehow there has been like a instrumentalizing of women's rights also as a tool for political polarization at sometimes, and we will have to. But I agree with President Halonen that in different contexts, maybe. Things are also handled differently, and there's more acceptability, or than maybe we are seeing on the surface. But also in terms of how to engage in these discussions, for example, well, of course, there's the case of Afghanistan, where we are very much concerned about the status of women. But I think in context like that, it is wise to think in terms of what can be the starting point of that dialogue, and whether we should push those issues as the first things that we engage on or require as prerequisites, or can we do that later? And that might also help, I mean, within those contexts, those voices also that are more moderate to take up those issues in due course. But simply, it's not an easy question to answer, but a very easy, very important issue and agenda to rethink also now the women, peace and security, how we make it relevant in the practical work that we do. Thanks.
Yes. As President Halonen said, we've been facing counter forces against gender equality for a very long time, and that is why we launched the feminist foreign policy in 2014, now with, I think, 15 countries having the same idea, not Sweden anymore, but still many other countries. And basically, this is about making use of the full potential of your country or your village or whatever you have. 50% of the people would be a fantastic loss if it wasn't used. And we used as a hinge for our work, rights, resources, and representation, and always to ask where are the women, because in all situations or all conversations, all problems, you would have women involved in one way or the other. And this is what we're losing now. I confronted this in Georgia, where Russia didn't accept to use the word gender. They don't accept the women, peace and security agenda anymore. And now we have the same from the new American administration. So it's really also about rallying around this topic from all of us that believe in it, including all our friendly men.
Can I be a little bit more optimistic? I always, it's very human that I always remember the problems, but not the optimistic side. In this UNCCD meeting in Saudi Arabia, so we have accepted, we have a very big program concerning the women's right as female farmers. And this kind of system comes from the rank and file level to the agreement. So we didn't try to make a new agreements in such a way that what it should be. In UN, most of the countries have a quite good legislation. But then when we see the situation in practical life, so more than 100 member countries are such kind where they have a different kind of the obstacles, hinders concerning the women's possibilities to be the farmer. And now when it's also the question of how we can get food enough. So it has become also in that way relevant to many others. And so they have made already few very good programs in different member countries where they had either checked that how the implementation has gone or what is the court system. And so we should, of course, have here the very good book, Her Land, which is the book concerning all these projects that they have been. So I mean that picture is in what perhaps you are also asking, it's in two ways. It's a dual. Somehow you can see a good progress, but then you see also terrible situations like Iran and Afghanistan. And I think that we have been most shocked by the Western European countries and USA, and a certain president, don't mention his name. And so that's another point. Yeah.
Thank you. So did anybody of you want to pick up on the values that we have, and you know, can we afford to be selective when we engage in dialogue and diplomacy?
I believe that diplomacy is about talking to the enemy. It may be more important that you talk to the enemy than that Sweden talks to Finland, since we're so close. Of course we talk anyway. So these cancellation policies that are prevailing now, I believe, are not helping us to move forward and to promote our values. And this is also where people like Minna and myself and others working at the second level with dialogue, also with those that governments do not talk to. I think this web, this network, not visible, is very, very important to actually keep the risks down a little bit. We cannot do marvels, but still we play an important role. The other aspect of this is to, as I said, nurture our values at home, to see to it that we stand on the platform that we are so proud of democracy and freedom and well-functioning welfare societies. Thirdly, I think we owe this to people, because people in the many countries with authoritarian leaders, they don't want authoritarian leaders. So it's also about having people-to-people contacts also in countries where we have difficulties at the government-to-government level. And there's no quick fix to this, but patience may be important, and again, investment in a very broad sense.
Yeah, I agree with what you say, Annika. And I said that also before, that in order to deal with an adversary, someone who is maybe even an enemy, you have to know that party, and you get to know it through dialogue and talks. But having said that, there are situations where signals are important as well. And I think in the present case of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, you have to think very carefully about what signal you send and when the time is right to talk to the Russians, and who is going to do it and at what level. And I think you both also imply that, you know, in secret and on a lower level, it's possible. I remember my first post was in Beirut, Lebanon, and there were over 80 different militias there, some of a more terrorist nature than anything else. And I, as a second secretary, I was able to talk to them. Most of them, not all 80 certainly, because it would have been too much. But my ambassador couldn't, because that would have implied a recognition of them. But so there are various means of doing this. And I thought when the idea came up about talking to Hamas, of course I was against that any official talk should take place with Hamas. It's a terrorist organization. But you could have a second secretary or a third secretary who meets with someone and have a little chat. I think so, in secret.
Or a mediation organization.
Yes, of course.
Because it's about bringing in the knowledge. Yeah. Where do they stand, as Anders said? Otherwise you won't know.
So maybe you mentioned knowledge, and also one of the aims here was to discuss a bit the technological development and maybe the use of AI as a help. I know I've been attending, the EU is having workshops on AI and diplomacy, and people were really enthusiastic, although I mostly, as also a lawyer, saw many dangers in that. But how do you feel as diplomats about that? And after this, I think we should move on to multilateral institutions. But a quick some comments. Is it good? Is it bad?
Yeah, I don't know so much about AI. It's, of course, obviously useful because it makes work easier. But I'm thinking about the digital meetings, and I would like to refer to the pandemic. And I think much of the polarizations we see today are a consequence of the pandemics, because people didn't meet and talk to each other. And I think social media is excellent to promote your position. It could be also what you said. You could involve people who would otherwise not be involved. But it is not an effective instrument of diplomacy, because you need to face the other party. And you learn so much through reading body language. Also, see to it that you don't send out the wrong signals yourself through body language. That is important too. So I believe very much in the physical meeting, and I had also over the last few years many digital meetings. It's not the same. It's not the same at all, and I think there is also a certain inhibition what you do there, because you don't know who is reading you, who is listening in, and all that. So I believe very much in the physical contact for diplomacy. But having said that, of course, there are other useful things about AI and digital instruments. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm very much for the AI concerning the, how could I say, the technical as a technical assistant and help, especially in sustainable development. We have had a lot of such kind of the items where we say that could be useful to do this and this mathematics, but it takes terribly much time. And now I hope so that we can get some of the multi-actor issues now solved with that. But I agree that with human beings to learn to know each other also personally is very important. And I will say that, have you seen the picture about Putin and Trump discussing? I would like to ask that how many of you are in Signal? I am. But I'm more careful what I accept to be in my group. But I mean that there are two different ways are needed. Yeah.
Maybe AI won't do away with the diplomats, but I can assure you that the researchers are really scared. Like, will we be needed at all in the future? Because AI will tell you what the research would say. Okay.
Who would control the AI? That's the question.
Then,
so
well,
it would create
maybe one person.
Everything from autonomous weapons
Yes.
to
it would be a
research
terrible society.
undertakings.
Yeah.
And democracy we can forget about.
But okay, so we also, mentioned, Anders, I think it was who mentioned the bilateral diplomacy and multilateral diplomacy. And they like two different kinds, but of course diplomacy. And you said that, if I remember correctly, that multilateral diplomacy is getting more important. So would you like to elaborate a bit on that? Like, what are the biggest differences? And also, maybe what is more satisfying for a career diplomat?
First of all, we should not forget about similarities. It is about nurturing relations with others. And you do a lot of bilateral work in the multilateral arena. And I think also during the Cold War, the last few years of the Cold War, I served at the UN for the first time. And I remember the Soviets then, they constantly used the UN for bilateral purposes. So when they needed to support a country bilaterally, they ordered all the satellites to vote for that country in a particular vote. And they always followed, because that's the way it worked at that time. So, of course, there are similarities. But I think what we need a multilateral diplomacy for is, where we work with many countries and try to build alliances and so on, is that we can build broader legitimacy for global action because we involve others. And that's very important. And if we lose the UN, we don't have a mechanism for creating broad legitimacy. And in particular after we negotiate something which is a little bit controversial, we need that stamp that this is legitimate. And besides, as a small country, and I have that perspective, obviously, we need to work with others. And the multilateral arena is the one for us. And whether it's good or bad for your career, I couldn't answer, because some people like bilateral better and some like multilateral better. I have liked both. I thought it was a tremendous privilege to be able to work in both fields.
Maybe, Annika, you want to say something on this, and maybe a few words quickly on the OSCE turning 50, and of course being in a different state, in a different position than we envisaged before.
First, I think our most obvious multilateral arena is the EU. Of course, you have a lot of common competence, but you also have intergovernmental action there. And I think it also takes us back to what we talked about before. How can we find platforms for our values? And I can dream of the EU becoming the fourth power in this sphere of influence game, where we, as the European Union and as Europe, promote the values we've talked about. And the values are also, by the way, universal, not European. And OSCE is another very important multilateral arena, and I think it's, in a way, at risk. We're very lucky that Finland is the chair of the OSCE this year, when also the Helsinki Final Act turns 50. And it is at risk for two reasons, because Russia has worked hard to undermine it for a very long time. Many of the agreements related to arms control, military transparency, and confidence-building measures are actually not valid anymore, the most important parts of the security pillar of the OSCE. So it can very easily happen that also European countries and Canada, we don't know about the US, that they will turn their back to the platform that the OSCE should provide and has been providing since 1990 on the fact that you cannot conquer territory by force. Every country has its right to choose its way forward, its security policies. And I think there will be losers if we lose the OSCE, and in particular the Central Asian countries, because if they want to move on the value base we talked about, they would certainly need the OSCE. And then not to forget the work it's doing on trying to manage and solve conflicts in the entire European sphere, and the work it's also doing on the environment. So I hope that we can rally around those principles and this setup in order then to find a way back to arms control and transparency involving also the great powers, even if they are very unwilling right now.
Okay, I mean, this discussion is just getting started, but of course I'm having a look at the watch, and it reveals that we don't have many minutes left. And I want to give the speakers a chance to in 1-2 minutes summarize or maybe put something new, completely new on the table for the continuing discussion in the library later on. But I would also like to ask the speakers to mention quickly a success, a diplomatic success, or something they are proud of having been part of, like something, I know not everything can be revealed, but if there is something that you can mention, so we leave together this room with at least successes and hope and an optimistic look to the future. But maybe we go this direction and start with Annika, ending then in President Hallam.
First, I wanted to say something about the shift for all of us working with diplomacy and mediation, and that is related to the interstate nature of the conflicts and the fact that we have, in most of the conflicts ongoing, also one enemy and one actor that we sideline with. And this also creates new spaces for mediation organizations, like, for example, what the European Institute of Peace is doing, trying to support Ukraine to be prepared for peace, not supporting Russia. So it's not about the mediation, but it's actually using the same tools to prepare a friendly country. As to successes, I can mention, and I'll try to be brief, something Anders was also involved in. It was in 1988, the Swedish government managed to convince the United States to open up a dialogue with the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which had a terrorist label. This was hard work involving American Jewish personalities and involving also other countries in the region. Also silent diplomacy with the foreign minister of the US, who was then Secretary Schultz. It was also about Yasser Arafat, who was then leading the PLO, making a speech in Geneva, and Anders was there when he said he denounced tourism instead of saying he denounced terrorism. And of course that then later on was handed over by Sweden to Norway, and then we had the Oslo Agreement, which is, I believe, not a big success after 30 years of problems, and now a full-scale war, but still that was an important step forward for an ongoing dialogue between the United States and making PLO move in to become a political organization, which I believe is important.
Thank you, Annika. Anders?
Yeah, I would like to say there's an old saying that for a diplomat, optimism is what courage is for a soldier. So I would like to end by an optimistic note, and I think you, President Harlan, also said that you have to see also the optimism, and that is that all trends like this, even negative ones, they come to an end at some point. And I believe personally that the traditional diplomacy that we've been used to is so old and goes back so way long back that it will certainly be there also in the future. Well, I don't have much of successes to brag about, but one thing that was an interesting one and learned and taught me something of importance, and that is patience. Especially when you work with in the multilateral field, you have to be patient. And I remember we worked on improving the UN handling of gender issues and were able to get a new organization, UN Women. And it took us 3 years to negotiate that. And there were many luncheons, I can tell you, trying to convince countries in the global south. At the end, it worked. And I would say in that context, too, working in the multilateral field and building relationship with other diplomats from other countries is very useful, because in that negotiation, I had very good use of my personal good relations with the Egyptian ambassador, whom I had known for years. So diplomacy works long terms and with patience.
Minna?
Yes, thank you. I perhaps would like to end with just the thinking that, I mean, for me, it's not a question of whether diplomacy or not. I think its role is more important than ever. The question is how. And to see, for example, a peace process, it's not an event, it's a process that you have to plan professionally, you have to anchor it to make it sustainable. So these summit diplomacy or quick fixes do not always carry the sustainability as a process that is anchored in a longer term. And I also think that, yeah, in terms of values, I think we need to recognize them. We have to, I think somebody said, know where you stand and stand there. You have your own values, but that doesn't hinder you from engaging with others and do that flexibly. But in terms of successes, I don't think I have so much to share. Sometimes it does feel that this is one step forward, 2 steps back exercise, and you have to find your belief and optimism in the small steps you're able to do. But maybe one such case where I have been a little bit involved was the Aceh peace negotiations that CMI and President Tahtsari mediated 2005. I was not involved myself, but I was involved in the follow-up. And traveling there after a province that had endured a 30-year conflict and now lived in peace, and the importance that the ordinary people felt that it made the impact in their lives. And that, I think, is the key and the result we should be aiming for, and thinking of that, the individuals and the societies that live in conflicts. Thanks.
So I think that was a very good discussion in such a way that, as you noticed, all those who have been involved very deeply in these issues, oh, not so much. And that's, in a way, the very truth, because it's not always, but mostly, it's not a question of one person, it's a question of teams. And it's how to use it, whether the atmosphere, whether the people are ready to accept those ideas. When I had a dual answer to you concerning myself, so I think that perhaps afterwards somebody could say that just becoming the first female president of Finland was the big I had only one vote. I mean that all the others have done it anyway. So concerning the SDGs, so I was a president in 2000. That's why I was together with the just now late the president of Namibia. We were co-chairing the Millennium Goals and succeeded much better than people believed. Then I was co-chairing the Fair Globalization with Benjamin Mkapa of Tanzania. That was quite good result. Then we started the Rio process, and there I was together with an South African president who was quite busy with his wife, but the vice president was excellent. She was excellent working with us. So I think that all that could be, but I would say so that now, those who are coming after us will show that whether it was a success. But then one thing, what I worked very hard, I confess all my sins, was the landmines, Ottawa Agreement. And then Finland, as the last one of the European Union countries, signed agreement. I have never heard that much, all kind of the hostility in social media and also by the diplomats, how terrible I have been, how I have been the secret friend of Mr. Putin because Finland did it. It was not me, in the matter of fact, I had my own sins, but it was the time of Sauli Niinistö when then we accepted, and then we will see. I think that the Ottawa Agreement is a great success, but it doesn't become smaller with that some people, some countries are doing what they are doing because, yeah, the wars are always terrible. Thank you. And thank you for your...
So the 2025 Kastelholm Talks have now come to an end, and it's my great privilege to thank all the panelists, excellent, insightful views, and of course President Halonen for joining in and participating in the debate. Thank you so much for the audience and also the audience online, and the discussion will continue later this afternoon. Thank you.